Dum 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 haha dum 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 dum. Another one bites the dust. Hello everybody. How's everybody doing? Well. Another vegan bites the dust. The roar within, Stefan, I hope I'm saying that correctly, quits veganism for good. Little bit of background story reading from his description on his YouTube channel. My name is Stefan, and I make videos about mental health and veganism. So, about a year ago, after having been vegan for 3 years, Stefan stopped eating vegan, and he got ridiculed by the vegan community and came back and started eating vegan again, which, in my opinion, probably had a little bit, at least a little bit, to do with the backlash that he got, right? So then he ate vegan for another year and quit. He made a couple of videos, which unfortunately he made private. They were taken down, I'm not sure. But he made a couple of videos explaining why he quit veganism, and he quoted health problems, a lot of health problems, significant enough health problems to want to quit veganism, and he got attacked. So he made another video saying that he will never be a vegan again, quitting seemingly for good, and that really got a lot of vegans triggered. Like these two clowns over here on Flemface's channel, analyzing his Stefan's videos and contradicting themselves at least 3 or 4 different times in their video, basically calling the guy a liar, essentially, making fun of him, so on and so forth, being kind of handling him with baby gloves on, but being extremely disrespectful and rude, and rejecting everything that he basically said, right? Criticizing him, just being complete bigots. Maybe if I get a chance, I'll break down their video and how they contradicted themselves at least 3 or 4 different times, because once again, veganism, like most ideologies I've looked at, if not all of them, just happens to be hypocritical, contradictory, thereby self-refuting, right? You let a vegan talk long enough, and he or she will basically put their foot in their mouth. And that's what these two did in that video, which was hilariously cringeworthy. But in that one video that Stefan made, where he discussed and talked about why he will never be vegan again, there was this one comment. I mean, there were a lot of comments of people attacking him, but there was this one comment where it really struck a chord with me because it was particularly vicious. And it was some skinny, pale chick basically calling him a liar and intimating that the animal well-being is more important than Stefan's well-being, right? Once again, self-refuting her ideology of veganism, because, well, unless she's mentally ill, she would never herself, if she encountered serious health problems on the vegan diet, she would then choose her own health over the well-being of animals. Her own well-being would become more important than the well-being of animals, right? So, provided that she's not mentally ill, who knows, she could be. The woman, I think it's safe to assume, just exposed herself as a huge hypocrite. And if you take a deep enough look at veganism and you listen to what vegans say, they obviously believe in a hierarchy of sentience, right? So these little bugs and ants that pesticides used to grow their vegan fare kill, that's okay, even though it's intentional. That's okay because a cow is more important on the sentience scale than a bunch of bugs, right? Ants or what have you. So clearly they believe in a scale of importance insofar as sentience is concerned. And but somehow all of a sudden this human being, which obviously once again for people who aren't mentally ill should be the highest on the sentience scale, well, once again that's not important anymore because allegedly animals are important. So not only are these people that are criticizing him and not taking his scientific experiment into account, uh, they're not only being hypocrites because if they were in his shoes, they would have done the same thing, but they're also contradicting this dogma of the scale of sentience, animal sentience, by pretending all of a sudden, now that it's convenient, that human beings all of a sudden somehow aren't atop that scale, right? All of a sudden, a cow or a fish, which we're not even too sure is very sentient to begin with, a fish, because that's what he started eating, fish, is somehow more important than a human being, right? So that's another self-refuting dogmatic belief of this vegan. And the thing that was perhaps most telling and also self-refuting was this whole idea of pretending to be ethical, right, and taking animal suffering into your moral calculus, if you will, but completely ignoring the suffering of a human being in this calculus, right? And still somehow pretending to be ethical, attacking this person, calling them names, saying they're a liar, so on and so forth, right? And this is the problem with this ethical vegan community, because according to their ideology, it is the carnist, or the person that eats meat, the carnivore, who is an unethical, immoral savage, right? But when I scroll through his video comments, the people that eat a normal diet or maybe a carnivorous diet primarily, they were empathetic. They understood his struggle and they were kind. They were well within their right to come back at him and say, look, dude, you judged us for 3 years and then another year saying that we're less ethical than you, that you're morally superior to us, essentially calling us bad people, right? So it would be well within their right to come back and say, look, man, you're a hypocrite. You're not this moral, ethical, greater than everybody else, holier than thou person that you pretended to be all this time, right? You're not that person. So fuck you. Don't eat our meat. Eat your veggies and suffer, right? They would have been well within their right to say that, but nobody did. All these supposedly, according to the vegans, unethical carnists came back and they gave them support and they were kind. And some vegans did as well, some. But the overwhelming majority of the vegans, at least as I saw, reading the comments on his videos, were completely bigoted. They were terrible assholes, very unethical, and they attacked him personally, calling him all kinds of names. So in this one vegan's journey, and this happens over and over and over, right? His journey out of veganism. Veganism didn't it just debunk itself on 3 different accounts? Didn't just prove to be a self-refuting ideology like all of them? But the thing that was really most striking to me was the blatant and unadulterated rejection of science, something that the vegans always put on the pedestal. right? They commend and praise and extol the virtues thereof. Science is always so important when it comes to vegans cherry picking studies, basically. But they pretend to be a very scientific community, right? And yet they completely rejected Stefan's scientific experiment, just as they reject every other vegans that quits veganism scientific experiment. The vegans that are successful on the vegan diet, at least for the time being, those scientific experiments, they love those, right? Because they cherry pick science. Now look, to explain what I mean. Stefan asked a question, which was, is veganism helpful? He did some research. He listened to vegans. He watched some videos, maybe a documentary or two. Maybe read a study or an article summarizing one or two. And he came to the conclusion, based on that background research, that veganism seems to be healthful. And he tested that hypothesis with an experiment by eating nothing but vegan fare for 3 years. And it didn't work. The procedure didn't work, so he troubleshot the procedure, carefully checked all steps and setups, and tested. I mean, maybe he wasn't quite that rigorous, but it was still a scientific, he applied the scientific method, right? And ran a scientific experiment. So after he failed in the first 3 years, he went back to veganism, tested it again by experimenting on his body for another year, and it didn't work. And that was enough for him to come to the conclusion that veganism does not work for me. Obviously, he noticed that there are other people like him out there, which probably gave him the courage to come out and finally quit, and the courage to be honest with himself. He noticed that there are other people like him that veganism doesn't work for. But he also admitted that veganism seems to work for a lot of people. And so he didn't extrapolate the findings of his anecdotal, yes, scientific research using the scientific method onto the populace at large. He just used the findings of his personal anecdotal scientific experiment to apply the results thereof to living his own life, which is very reasonable, very respectable, and once again, however anecdotal, very scientific within his own milieu, right? He's not telling you that you should or shouldn't do this. This is very respectable, reasonable, and it's scientific. But vegans all of a sudden don't care about science. And anytime a former vegan explains how they ran this scientific experiment using this scientific method, sometimes very rigorous, and it failed them, right, using this science, they reject it. And they reject the ever-mounting evidence of the ever-mounting number of people who run this sort of experiment, scientific experiment on their bodies, and they fail, right? Which in and of itself, you need to start considering that as a scientific study. Maybe not the most rigorous scientific study, but definitely more rigorous than some epidemiological study finding a link between, milk and anal cancer. Correlation is not causation, right? So these vegans who pretend to be so scientific and who always put science on the pedestal and pretend like it's so important, all they really do is they cherry pick the science. And when a vegan is successful on the vegan diet, well, that science is good to them, right? That's correct science. But when a vegan fails on the vegan diet, they reject that as scientific and they just degrade it down to the level of an anecdote, right? Yet again, exposing themselves for the hypocrisy that they are, and yet again exposing veganism for the self-refuting ideology that it is. So just in this one example of the roar within, veganism just debunked itself, 3 or 4 times? And again, if I get the time and feel like it, I'll break down this video from Flemface because there were quite a few more self-refuting or evidence of self-refutation, other evidence, more evidence of, well, vegans being hypocrites, essentially. All right? Anyway, another vegan bites the dust, and the vegan community are in full damage control, putting their foot in their mouth. Because they're not scientific, they're logically inconsistent, and they for damn sure are not moral or ethically superior people. All right? Thank you for listening. Rate, comment, subscribe. If you're vegan, be sure to hit that butthurt button. And I'll see you guys on the next one.